All right, my good friends, this is Mr. Davis. It is Tuesday night, so this is stuff that we need to go over for Wednesday. Good news is just about everybody has taken the test so far, and we're doing a really good job on the test, which is awesome. Just terrific on the multiple choice questions. Had a 20 out of 20 in there, so that was pretty sweet. So that was Mackie got a 20 out of 20 on the multiple choice, so that's awesome. Um, what was really awesome that everybody seemed to be doing a really good job of was you were using evidence in your SAQ questions. So you were actually putting in the facts that you couldn't dispute. Some of them you might have used incorrectly, which is that happens. Not a huge deal. Just shows that you're trying, and I was really really pleased with that. And because of that, you don't have like anything to do tonight other than just watch this brief video. So I actually was going to have you do something, and I decided that I would go ahead and do it for you. So I did your homework for you, and I'm going to show you what I did. That's not an April Fool's joke. I didn't do an April Fool's joke because I'm sure I would have like 1,000 questions on emails if I was joking around or not. But so, not an April Fool's joke. I did do your homework for you tonight. All right, so now we've made it. We are now at Unit 1 review. So, we're on the all 6 reviews. So, I'm going to share a few things with you, go over a few different things. I'm going to get my timer up for myself to make sure I don't go overboard as far as making this video last how it should. Okay, so this is shared with you. And then on this first page, there's a link. It says icomments.org. This is a PDF of our regular World Civ textbook, which you don't have. So I'm going to have you read some stuff. I'm going to have you answer some questions. But like I said, no typed in homework. Just watch the video tonight, which is nice. So Unit 1 overview. So Unit 1 was called the Global Tapestry. It talks about Song China, Dar al Islam, South and Southeast Asia, the Americas, Africa, and Europe. And basically, it was just one big hodgepodge of what was going on in the world at 1200. Remember, this course started at 1200 AD. It doesn't start with the cavemen like my regular World Civ class does. It starts at what was going on in the world as in 1200 AD. So, the first thing we talked about was the Song Dynasty in China. So, if you could please click on this, it's going to take you right here. It's going to get up for me in a second here. This one's already up, so I'm just going to click on it. Okay, if you could take about 3 minutes and read 264 and 265. Actually, down to the Song Dynasty on page 266. So 264 through half of 266. I'm gonna let you read it, and then I'm gonna pause it here. I'm gonna ask you some questions. Okay, so thanks for reading that. Now, this course, like I said, starts at 1200. And you always have to write using facts, but there's nothing said that says you can't use facts that are true before 1200 AD. So this is just a cool little couple pages that shows you the history of how the early dynasties in China were set up and how long they lasted, what did they accomplish. Big thing here that they accomplished that we were going to talk about is the Grand Canal, which is not on this map. Yeah, it is on this map. So the Grand Canal goes from Hangzhou up to Beijing. So it's made of steel. It helped the emperor, the cruel emperor, keep an eye on his people, etc. One of the things we're going to talk about is Champa rice comes from the south to the north, and they're going to have a population boom thanks to the Grand Canal. The Han Dynasty was in there. Today, 94% of the people have their heritage drawn back to the Han Dynasty. See how big China is at this point? Okay. This is the Silk Road as well. It's a lot of interesting facts about getting to the Song Dynasty, which actually the Song Dynasty is in 1200 when we start, but it's only briefly in the 1200s because the Song Dynasty is going to get captured by the Mongols. So take some time now and just read the rest of this section, which is from 266 to 268. So I started the Song Dynasty and go on through to the end of Unit 1. Okay, so thanks for reading, and we'll have some questions on this reading. Here talks about the foot binding process that we talked about. This is kind of like and one step good for women, one step bad. Talks about one of the women in Chinese history that had a lot of power, Wu Zhao, and she was a mistress to the emperor in 649 and then became an emperor herself. Later, but that was prior to the Song Dynasty. During the Song Dynasty, it talked about how they instituted the practice of foot binding, how it made their feet unnaturally small, permanently deformed women's feet, caused great pain, and made women unable to stand or walk without assistance. So there were some instances that women did have a few rights in the Song Empire, but they also were definitely discriminated against here. Says few Chinese women had any power. An exception was Wu Zhao, Empress Wu, the concubine of the second Tang Emperor. She then became Empress of China and ruled half the century. As in other parts of the world, female children were considered less desirable than male children. In times of famine, female infants might be killed. If there was not enough food to feed the whole family, when a girl married, she became part of the husband's family. In addition, a girl's parents were expected to provide a dowry, which is money, goods, or property, to her husband when she married. Poor families often sold their daughters to wealthy villagers. So this is pretty much just a sign of continuity that unfortunately women are going to be discriminated against even up until today, which we often talk about in class. Also, we saw some things, Marco Polo in here. We've seen this quote before, talking about China. It says one of the cities he goes to is the largest, wealthiest city on earth. So many pleasures may be found, he said, that one fancies himself to be in paradise. So Marco Polo was, of course, the world traveler, talking about his trip into China. Some other things, some innovations that the Chinese created, gunpowder. They also talk something that we don't talk about too much, but for rich Chinese during this period of life offered many pleasures. There were new forms of entertainment, such as playing cards, chess brought from India, the paddle wheel boat, horseback riding made possible by the stirrup. That is a fact that you can use, is that they created a stirrup which made travel easier. Basically, it just means like you were putting your feet in holders while you're riding a horse. The camel saddle was a big invention on the Silk Road and on the Trans-Saharan network, and the stirrup was very important in terms of traveling by horse and by camel. They also made block printing in the 8th century, provided new ways to communicate. So some of this go back and forth before 1200, after 1200, but it gives you an idea of how China was set up, why the different dynasties come and go, and there's often periods of civil war in between them. There's also a big continuity in China in the fact that they're always going to be like a desire of outside groups. So the Mongols want to take over China just like the British want the sphere of influence inside China. So that is a continuity throughout 800 years, that people are still trying to get good trade deals with China. Okay, so that's where our reading textbook is going here. Let me go back to this. You can read over that first slide talking about the agricultural revolution. These are different words, and the bold words are things that are kind of like facts you can use. The civil service exam is something that was used, and civil service exam said that China wanted to have the best people running their government they could find, and to do that, you had to pass an exam. And the fact was only 1 in 5 people passed the exam, so that's pretty strict test. But they used a civil service exam. They were governed by these Confucian philosophies. The innovations, some things they control, which we read about. The Grand Canal increases trade. They're rich. All right, so this is the Grand Canal right here. They made steel. Says they used steel to help build the Grand Canal, the walls of the canal. Steel and iron production allowed farm tools to be stronger and more efficient. Champa rice, which is going to come up from present day Vietnam. High caloric rice that grew in dry soil year round. This is a big thing. China has a similar climate than we do. Where Beijing is in northern China is very similar to how we have our climate and growing seasons. So they grew champa rice, which could be grown year round. Their diet is going to kind of be based on rice. This is huge. Another fact is that during the Song Empire, the population is going to go up to 100 million people. They had luxury goods. People wanted the silk. There's really interesting stories about, silkworms trying to be smuggled outside of China, and all kinds of crazy tales about the cultivation of silk in China and how it makes its way outside of China. In Europe, they were wearing wool, clothing, wool sweaters with no nice undershirt underneath it. So before cotton, wool was like the luxurious thing to do. Innovations allowed fewer farmers, so they had artisans or laborers that lived in urban areas. They called, get this out of the way here, they called this industrialization. Sorry. Okay, so Confucianism is a big, the belief system. It's more of like a societal belief system more than an actual religion. You wouldn't say, I mean, maybe they hold Confucius in a high regard, but they don't worship him like a god. So you could have some Confucius principles and still be a Buddhist. Buddhism comes from India. There's different forms of Buddhism. The one we talked about was the Mahayana Buddhism in China, which is like a collective group of people. China was a collective society, so the Mahayana Buddhism really fit well for the society. So the Buddha here was from India, but his religion gets exported to China and then spread all throughout Asia. Buddhism is very, very big throughout Asia. There's Buddhists in Kentucky, but the majority of Buddhists are like in East and Southeast Asia. You're also going to see a term come up here. It's Neo-Confucianism. Rose in Song China as a response to the rise of Buddhism. Some of the Confucius scholars, they didn't like the fact that they would be taking time out of the day to worship, trying to achieve nirvana and enlightenment. They wanted the society to run smoothly. So because of this kind of quote-unquote threat of Buddhism, Neo-Confucius came around and put a new spin on Confucianism to make it more popular to the people, to allow it to adapt to get more followers. we're also going to see Buddhism and Confucianism spread in Korea, Japan as well. So if you can just take a moment to read this. Okay, so even though this was the first topic we discussed way back in August, I think a lot of this comes back to us pretty easy. The tribute system. Everybody bowed down, they kowtowed to the Chinese. We talked about even today how there was a story about the NBA would kind of kowtow to the Chinese in terms of how China's handling the protests in Hong Kong. Um, Another thing that's going on in Song China, excuse me, is that they're exporting their culture to their nearby neighbors, Japan, Korea, Vietnam. It's called sinification. Sinification is when people adapt to the Chinese culture, to the Chinese way of life. If you get a question about the Mongols kind of got sinified, if that's a word. Is they We did a class activity where we said like how would the Mongols rule China, and when we asked you how they should do things, we had you vote with your feet because that's how the Mongols voted on horseback, was they stuck a foot up in the air. So the Mongols were worried because if they made their capital in Beijing in China, they thought the Mongol people would get soft. And that's kind of what happened. They got sinified because China was such an awesome place and had so many awesome things to offer. Um, they got sinified and they got lulled to sleep, and the Yuan dynasty is very short lived. Okay, I'm going to play this video. One of the other the big concepts when we get into this part of the world is uh, religions and rulers using religion to justify their rule. And actually, I'm going to hold off on this. So let me just stop this. Okay, so I said I was going to do your homework tonight, so which I did. So my plan in this review is to have a spice chart for nearly every topic that we've talked about. So I've shared this with you. This was like our first night's homework in our review. So Unit 1, Lesson 1 is the Song Dynasty. So I made a spice chart. This is all facts of the Song Dynasty. Just really simply put in a spice chart. Spice, if you remember, if we go down here, I included it on the second page. Spices: social, political, interaction, culture, economic. And then it gives you a bunch of things that could fit into a social grouping or a political grouping here. So what I did with the Song Dynasty, um, I put in a bunch of facts that could go in a certain box. There's several things, especially society and culture. I just said referred to the social box. So there's a lot of things that could go in multiple boxes. So what I did is basically every bullet, every dark bullet is a fact. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, I don't know, 11, 12, 13, about 20 facts here. And then I like kind of briefly explained each fact. So I'm not talking about writing a research paper here, but for homework, I might say, fill out a spice chart of Dar al-Islam with 2 bullets in each box. Okay. So just with that reading and the slideshow, you should be able to put a ton of things in these boxes. And we'll talk about getting ready for the AP test. But if we have a big arsenal of facts that we can study in one spot, hopefully short answer questions are just going to be very manageable if we can go back and in our memory bank and look at uh, talking about facts from different topics. Okay, so you did a really good job with your short answer question. So I did this one for you. So later on this week, we'll be doing one where I'll just take this out of here. It'll be lesson 2. It'll be Dar al Islam. So I don't have it up, but I made a Quizlet, a 20-term Quizlet for Unit 1 that I will put in here somewhere. I'll just probably put it on this first slide, like Unit 1, Topic 1 Quizlet. And so we'll have Quizlets, and we'll have all kinds of facts for you to use. All right, so just finish up this ed puzzle, and that's the only thing you have to do for Wednesday. Take care.